In the 3 months since she announced her deal, the Prime Minister's given 3 statements in Downing Street, made 4 trips to Brussels, made 10 major appearances in the Commons, trying to sell the deal.
Or we can accept that I've listened very carefully to what has been nothing about what it does support.
But 67 days after the unveiling, 6 days after a thumping defeat for the deal, Theresa May sounded like she was still focused, not on the parties she'd started talking to last week, but on keeping her party and its Northern Ireland allies together.
So I will be talking further this week to colleagues, including in the DUP, to consider how we might meet our obligations to the people of Northern Ireland and Ireland in a way that can command the greatest possible support in the House. And I will then take the conclusions of those discussions back to the EU.
What makes her think that what she tried to negotiate in December will succeed in January? Mr. Speaker, this really does feel a bit like Groundhog Day.
Earlier, a cross-party delegation backing a second referendum requested and got a meeting with Theresa May's deputy, David Lidington. But 3 hours later, the Prime Minister herself suggested a second referendum might even endanger public order.
There has not yet been enough recognition of the way that a second referendum could damage social cohesion by undermining faith in our democracy.
The tough talk was softened with a new announcement to waive the £65 fee for EU citizens who want to register for settled status.
I can confirm today that when we roll out the scheme in full on the 30th of March, the government will waive the application fee so that there is no financial barrier. So there is no financial barrier for any EU nationals who wish to stay.
Meeting. Can you tell us about it?
Do you think you were listened to, or was this all for show?
A very constructive meeting. We've again made the case very loud and clear for a people's vote.
The second referendum supporters got some Whitehall FaceTime today, but the pro-Brexit Tory rebels who voted against the Prime Minister last week think she moved towards them. They believe the government is exploring a government amendment that could show Brussels where a Commons majority lies, backing the deal if there's a promise in law the backstop would end.
Let's be clear, this is a positive day if this is what the Prime Minister does indeed do. If we do move in this direction, I think the evidence is that if you look at the what you were seeing before the Chequers announcement in July, there was a consistent, if narrow, majority for this kind of deal. And I think you would probably resurrect that.
No chance, some told the Prime Minister in the Commons.
Because there was a large majority against the proposal last week, and there are probably more numerous Remainers who voted against her than there are Brexiteers, and she needs to reach out to them.
A big cross-party effort will now focus on how backbenchers can use amendments next week to stop Britain leaving the EU with no deal. One amendment from Tory and Labour former ministers suggests that for one day only, backbenchers should be allowed to come forward with their own bill. And that, it's expected, could delay Brexit by months in order to avoid a no-deal Brexit. Another amendment opposed by the former Attorney General Dominic Grieve suggests that on any day that 300 MPs from different parties, including at least 10 MPs from the Conservative Party, can come together and agree on a bill, that bill should go to the top of the menu for the next day's Commons proceedings. That's extremely unusual practice here, and you'd still need a majority of MPs to back the bill before it became law.
The executive has run out of ideas, and it's also, I think, misusing the way in which the House has the constitutional role of the House of Commons.
You think it's gagging it?
It is gagging it, and it's unacceptable that the House of Commons should be gagged in this fashion. Yes, I feel that very strongly.
Some people are calling you a bit of a mini despot. You think they're despots?
I think that there are people who are failing to understand the constitutional role of the House of Commons.
Theresa May warned those devising wheezes to stop no deal would end up stopping Brexit altogether.
So when people say rule out no deal, the consequences of what they are actually saying are that if we in Parliament can't approve a deal, we should revoke Article 50. Mr. Speaker, I believe this would go against the referendum result.
She was flanked by cabinet ministers themselves determined to stop no deal. Others lurk in the lower ranks of government too.
And it's absolute nonsense, and we should rule it out immediately and then get on with a great deal with Europe, and we can all move ahead.
Look, she's literally just said in the House of Commons that you can't rule out no deal in the way you want to because it involves revoking Article 50. Literally just said that.
No, it doesn't. We've got until the end of March. I'm sure there are other ways to do it.
I mean, you're really pushing at the boundaries of collective responsibility there, aren't you?
I don't think so.
Do you check the phone to see if you've actually been sacked? It's
No,
a funny old
because
time, this, isn't it?
Why would they want to sack me when I support the Prime Minister's
Because
deal?
you just contradicted what she said in the House of Commons.
Well, really, that's for her to decide.
The Prime Minister, meeting the New Zealand Prime Minister today, knows Richard Harrington speaks for quite a few ministers in her government, who, in these extraordinary times, would quite like to see backbench amendments tying their Prime Minister's hands.
Well, Gary's with me now. Gary, to coin a prime ministerial phrase, is it a case of nothing has changed?
Well, I think something might have changed since last Thursday. I know that seems like a lifetime ago, but that was when people of all different views on Europe were being asked to walk down Whitehall and contribute to the government's policy. It looks a bit, or talks are ongoing, we are told, but you would think, listening to the Prime Minister in there, could be forgiven for thinking that that process is at an end and that she's retreated back to where she was originally, trying to get votes primarily, very much primarily, out of her own party and the DUP. That's what it sounds like, and some cabinet ministers who were on the conference call for cabinet yesterday came away with the distinct impression that she is thinking of trying to come up next week when there's a vote with an amendment that tries to corral people into something they can support, like a sunset clause on the backstop, and then she can go back to the European Union and say, look, there were X people in that box, Y voted for it, X plus Y equals a majority, now give me what I want.
And briefly, what about these dire warnings about a second referendum?
Really quite strong language from the Prime Minister. I'm told stuff that she has talked about privately and wanted to share more widely, but she was talking about how it could shatter faith in democracy, a second referendum, affect social cohesion. A lot of questions about just how much is she actually saying there could be violence on the streets. I think it's quite hard to come away with the idea that that isn't what she's talking about. So anybody who was entertaining the idea that the Prime Minister might just, under pressure, somehow end up signing up to a second referendum, you do get the impression that even Theresa May has boxed herself in there.
Gary, thanks very much. Well, a little earlier I sat down with the Brexit Minister, Robin Walker, and I asked him how the Prime Minister could say she was respecting the view of MPs by persevering with a deal they voted down so dramatically in the Commons.
Well, I think Theresa May's listened very carefully to the key issues that were raised in the debate that led to that vote. She's listened to the concerns about the backstop, she's listened to the concerns on the other side, perhaps about EU citizens' rights, and she's made a number of important announcements today about the way forward.
Give me one area where she's changed her red lines, where she's shifted her red lines.
Well, I think she's been clear that we want to leave the EU with a deal, but in order for the House to support that deal, she needs to address the concerns about the backstop. That does mean talking to colleagues in the DUP and the Conservative Party and across the House about that. But also she's addressed some of the key issues that were raised in the debate by the opposition, about the environmental commitments, about workers' rights, about many issues on this front. And today I think the very significant announcement, which reflects feedback from MPs on all sides of the debate, that we are waiving the settled status fee of £65 for EU citizens, making sure that they can stay and they don't have to pay it.
What seems to be being proposed is some kind of bilateral deal which would remove the backstop from the withdrawal agreement or time limit the backstop in some way. But the EU won't have any of that, will they?
Well, I think the EU are very clear that they want to hear from the UK now as to the way forward in the negotiations. What is the deal you can accept is the question they're asking. I think it's right for the Prime Minister to establish across the House of Commons what that is and then to go back and negotiate for it as hard as possible.
Well, but the EU has been absolutely clear that they won't have anything that is a bilateral deal. I mean, Michel Barnier, the chief negotiator, said the 27 are working as one. There's no scope for a bilateral deal.
But we've also seen Poland, for instance, proposing at the council alternatives to the backstop and time limits to that. But I think it's interesting. But we are seeing that discussion taking place within the EU.
If you say there's a recognition across the House that they don't want no deal, why not take no deal off the table, or at least put that to a vote in the Commons so that MPs can express their view on that?
There's a very straightforward way of taking no deal off the table, and that is to vote for a deal. That's what I did last week, but many colleagues had concerns about that particular deal and aspects of it, such as the backstop. What we now have to do is agree what the House can support. And
why not have an indicative vote in the House then, to see what MPs can agree on and what they can't?
The government is putting forward an amendable motion. We will have votes on that motion next Tuesday, and that will give the House an opportunity to set out a range of views and to vote on those views and to give its own indication. So
if MPs were to vote by a majority to block no deal, Would the government respect that?
The best way for MPs to block no deal is to vote for a deal.
You made that point. But if MPs were to vote by a majority on that specific point to block no deal, would the government respect that?
I think it would have to depend on the mechanism. If the mechanism was legal and a sensible way forward, that is what we want to pursue. But that means getting a deal. That means getting a deal that the House can unite around.
Let me ask you very bluntly, is suspending Article 50 preferable to no deal or not?
I don't see how suspending Article 50 helps the situation. I think it creates further uncertainty. I think the EU are very clear that whilst the court concluded that the UK could unilaterally revoke Article 50, but it can't unilaterally suspend
But the EU has also made it clear they might look upon that favourably. I just want to ask you a very clear question.
I think we also have to look at...
Is suspending Article 50, is delaying Brexit, whether it's for a few weeks or a few months, is that preferable to no deal?
I think we also have to look at some of the challenges of delaying in this sense. The fact that we would be entering into a set of European elections in this country that no one has any particular appetite for, and no one in the EU has any particular appetite for our MEPs to be sitting in Parliament over the next term. The fact that it would involve reopening the question of money and payments in the future and entering another multi-annual financial framework. I don't think any of those things are particularly attractive.
Is no deal preferable to suspending Article 50? Let me ask you the other way around.
I'm in favour of getting a deal which secures the transition period, the implementation period that businesses want to see.
Okay, if you can't do that, it's no deal or it's suspending Article 50. Which is preferable?
Well, the legal default is no deal, and it will take a change to the law for the government to change that. But my view is we should press ahead to get a deal.
Robin Walker, thanks very much.
Where Theresa May has outlined her Plan B for unblocking Brexit, it's effectively Plan A, but with a commitment to look again at the Irish backstop, a move to try and convince Conservative Brexiteers and Democratic Unionists to change their minds and back her deal. To Remainer MPs calling for a second referendum, the Prime Minister warned that could lead to social unrest. Joining me from the Commons lobby, Andrea Jenkins, Conservative MP, and the Labour MP, Alison McGovern. Andrea Jenkins first. The Prime Minister is backing on you and other members of the pro-Brexit ERG to back her deal. What does she need to change at a minimum to get your support?
Well, I understand that the meeting with fellow, former ministers who are on the Brexit side, including John Whittendale, etc., went really well with the Prime Minister at the back end of last week. So that gives us Brexiteers hope, actually, that the dialogue is open. As Brexiteers, we are open to putting our views forward, to listening. But I think ultimately what we'd like to see is ensure that, the backstop, it's got legal text attached to it. But also, why are we giving the £39 billion for virtually nothing in return? So that's a too big thing for us Brexiteers.
But removing the backstop or time limiting it is what you need at a minimum?
Well, that's a minimum. We'd also want them to look at the £39 billion as well, because we'd like to, a big chunk of that invested into our own people.
You're asking an awful lot there, and the EU's made clear it's not going to back that. So what then? Is that no deal?
Well, let's look at the EU, the way they negotiate. It's always in the 11th hour that they come up with something. I mean, back in 2016, Michel Barnier was quoted in Le Point newspaper saying that his job is to make it as difficult as possible to ensure that in the end that Britain get the worst deal possible, that they will want to remain in the EU. But we've also seen this evening the French come out and say that their French farmers are really fearing a no-deal Brexit. So we should never take that off the table. We should use this as leverage to the EU in the negotiations to get a deal what's right for Britain. As a British MP, I'm standing up for Britain, not for the EU.
Well, I could see Alison McGovern shaking her head there. I mean, no deal, we're hurtling towards it, aren't we?
There's no form of Brexit that's good for our country. We know that.
So you're trying to stop Brexit?
I listened to you, Andrea. Unfortunately, having been through this process, the past 2 years have demonstrated that. What we've heard is that, people want to rip up the backstop, which is necessary because of the situation in Northern Ireland and to maintain an open border. So actually, these are not small, minor demands that are being asked for. These are really big things, and we know that the European Union is not going to resile from its commitment to Northern Ireland and to the Good Friday Agreement.
Okay, but the second referendum, as Theresa May put it today, would do all sorts of damage to social cohesion in Britain. That must surely worry you.
we have already done serious damage to social cohesion in Britain by what's gone already. I don't see why we can't have future democratic events. We had a general election in 2017. Brexit was a huge part of that debate. Brexit's going to continue to be a part of our political debate for many years to come. The thing that we all have to do is to make sure that our own conduct is good for social cohesion and not bad for social cohesion. We can't rule out democratic events on that basis.
Andrea Jenkins, you're shaking your head?
Completely. I mean, I completely agree with what you said, actually, as an interviewer. It will affect our communities. I mean, on the day of the referendum result, I had people come up to me. Don't forget, my seat was Labour for 85 years previously, so Labour's been ignoring these people for so long.
That's simply not true.
Excuse me.
That's simply not
true. I, in the end, kept quiet when you spoke. But the important thing is, on the referendum day, a gentleman my age, 45, came up to me and said, I'm going to vote in this referendum. I've never voted before. I feel I've finally got a voice and a stake in our country's future. We cannot let these people down. I don't believe it's a sad state of affairs, Alison.
There were hundreds of thousands of people who didn't vote in the referendum who would now like to have their say.
Alison, please stop interrupting
so you can
me.
argue it either way.
Please stop interrupting me. It's a sad state of affairs when politicians think that they know far better than the constituents who put them there in the first place. I believe in democracy, and we've had the referendum result. We can't keep having the answer until people like you find the answer acceptable.
I believe in democracy too, and we've had a general election since the Brexit
You just
referendum.
want to stop Brexit, Alison.
And we'll have general elections to come, and we'll have democratic events in the future. And what we have to do is make sure that our conduct as politicians leads the way in terms of social cohesion rather than adding to the division.
Well, there's precious little agreement, so can you agree perhaps that the safest thing now would be to suspend Article 50?
I think it's going to be necessary, and Cabinet Ministers have said that too.
Why kick it into the long grass even longer? It creates more uncertainty. Let's deal with it head on and let's get some stability for our country.